Oh, here it goes.
Hey everybody.
Hey there.
We'll start out here before we all enter. So maybe the best thing to do would be for everybody to be down here, and then we can talk and look around, and then then we can come up to the house.
Oh, here it is. Have it right here.
Welcome to the Morris-Jumel mansion. Hello, everyone.
Hello there.
Good afternoon. My name is Camilla,
Hey, Camilla.
and I'm going to be your tour guide today. So I'm going to talk first a little bit about where we are on the island and a little bit about the house from the outside, and then we'll go inside and we'll get to see everything throughout the house. So, let me tell you a little bit about where you're standing. Now, I don't know if you want to just take a quick, just look around, not walking, but just with your eyes, look around and see where we are, like geographically speaking, like what kind of a place is this? Like, are we low down? Are we high up? Are we near water? Are we not near water? What are you seeing? Yes.
Well, when I walked in here, I thought I walked in the baby park.
Yes. It is kind of a baby park. It's a little bit of a park, a small park. This is only a small part of a really, really big, not even a park. It was just the land was really, really big here. The person who built this house had 136 acres of land. So everything here that you see outside of this house was not here when they built this house. They built this house in 1765, and as you might have noticed, it's not low down, right? It's on the top of a hill. Yes. Want to add to that?
Yes. And it was years ago, maybe 200, 300 years ago, my father explained to me all New York City was all farms. Now houses are the job and the Wall Street, and that was all farms. Then you go Belmont Avenue, that was a farm too.
You're 100% right. That's exactly right. So all of this was farmland. That's exactly right. And you could see from this hill all the way down to where Wall Street is, and all the way down there, because there were no buildings. There was nothing, no buildings, but there was a river down here, and there was a river that way. So does anybody know what the rivers around here are called? Any names of the rivers? Yes.
Harlem and Hudson.
Perfect. Exactly. So this is the Harlem River, and that's the Hudson River. And so you could see boats coming in, you could see anybody approaching. There was a road coming up on the side here. They called that the Kingsbridge Road.
I think I heard that road once.
You probably have, especially if you know anything about the Bronx. There's Kingsbridge in the Bronx. There's Kingsbridge Road that came up. So yes, so this was this house built in 254 years ago.
Wow.
Before the American Revolution.
Wow.
And it was built by a guy named Roger Morris and his wife Mary Phillips. And we're going to look inside. You're going to see all the rooms, and I'm going to talk to you a lot more about them. I just want to point out a few more things. Do you notice these? What are these? Anybody? What are these? Know what these are called?
Poles.
Okay, poles, but a kind of pole. It has a different name. Anybody have that name?
Column.
Column. Very good. It's a column. Okay, so this is built to make it look like ancient Rome or ancient Greece. This was a fashion back in 254 years ago that they would make their houses look very fancy and very grand by having these big, tall columns. Okay, so this is a colonial style house. So we're going to go inside, and then we're going to go to a room in the back. And if I don't know, is it okay for people to sit on the floor? we have a carpet. Is that okay? Okay, so we'll do that, and then we'll talk for a while, and then we'll see the whole house, okay? So, what I'd like is a chaperone, and then there are a few rules which I'm sure you already know, which I'm just going to go over. This is a museum, right? So that means no touching any of the objects. I'm sure you already know that.
Just see it.
Also, it means no, not even the walls, because even the walls are part of the museum. You can ask any questions you want just by raising your hand, and we will talk about whatever you're interested in asking about, okay? I think we're ready to go inside.
Photos okay?
I'm sorry?
Photos?
Photos are fine as long as you don't use a flash, okay? So,
What about camera phones?
that's fine as long as there's no flash. Yes, camera phones are way in. And come, just in front of me, wherever you're comfortable. You can sit down on the floor, that's fine. Or you can stand, whatever you prefer. We're going to talk for a while. Come closer, because I really want you to hear and, yeah. Come up to here. That would be great. And again, if you want to sit down, please sit down. Otherwise, standing is fine too. So again, welcome. I'm going to tell you a little bit about the man that built this house. So what you're looking at here, there's a special thing about this room. It's a funny shape. It's a different shape than normally. If you look at it, take a minute to look around the room and look at the shape of the room. You can see it has a lot of different angles, and the walls are like it's like there's more than one wall. It's not just square, right? It's not exactly square and it's not exactly round. So if you look around, you could maybe count, see if you can count the walls, and I take some guesses about how many walls are in this room, if you count them. How many walls? And that the doorway in the back counts as one wall, so that's one. So see if you can count, and then I'll take some guesses about how many walls this room has.
Is it like 3, I guess, or probably 6?
Okay, that's a guess. Probably 6, yeah.
I say about 6 also.
Okay,
I say
somebody.
12.
Okay,
That's my guess.
all right, yes.
Well, my guess 13.
Okay. All right, now I'm going to go ahead and count with everybody. So we're going to count this first wall. Just allow me, and I'll walk around and show you, okay? So this one is 1, okay? Then we've got 2. Then we've got 3. Then we've got 4. And then this one actually counts as 5. We've got 6. We've got 7, this big one. And then we have 8. So this room it has 8 walls, and it's called the octagon room because it has 8 sides. Now, is there some animal that you know of that's got the name oct in it that has 8 somethings, swims in the ocean? Octopus. Exactly, octopus. So oct means 8, so this is an 8-walled room. And this was special when Roger Morris, I'm going to just ask you not to touch the table at all. Sorry about that, but even it's fine. But that's what I mean. Everything is, whatever. But again, I promise I'll answer you. Just give me a minute to talk a little bit more, okay? So Roger Morris built this house in a special way. First of all, he wanted to build a fancy house. He was quite rich. And he wanted to build a fancy house, and he built it on top of this high hill where you could see all around, you could see all the way down to where the ships were coming in New York Harbor, what would be today South Street Seaport, and you could see up into the Bronx, you could see all the way over to the Hudson River, and of course the Harlem River is right here. So it was a good place to show off that you had a big fancy house, right? So that was one thing. Also, he added this special room which nobody else in all of America had at the time, this room called the octagon room. I don't know if you guys have ever seen something called a gazebo that's outside, it's like a little, sometimes it has like a railing around it. It's very, very pretty, sometimes in country towns.
I see them.
You've seen a gazebo? So it's almost like he took the idea of a gazebo, you know how they have many sides like this, and he attached it to the house and made it his elegant parlor, his elegant room. So he was the first to do that in all of America, what was then called the colonies. And for the, have you done any kind of talking at all about the American Revolution or anything having to do with that?
When I was in high school, we discussed about the 13 colonies,
Okay.
the history of the United States.
Got you. So there you go. So this was the only house of its kind in the 13 colonies in 1765 when it was built. Okay, so Roger Morris, let me talk a little bit about the American Revolution because it has a lot to do with this house. Roger Morris, I'm going to show you a picture. I'll get back to your question in a minute. Roger Morris and his wife, and we can pass this around. I'm going to show it to you and then we're going to pass it around. So this is Colonel Roger Morris and his wife Mary Phillips. So Colonel Roger Morris was English, and he married this girl from Westchester, from really what today is Yonkers. And if you know Yonkers, or you've been up there, what's Yonkers Town Hall now was actually their family home.
Westchester County, New York.
Correct. She and her family had a lot of property and a lot of land up there, including what's now Yonkers Town Hall, and also a place called Phillipsburg Manor. That's named after Mary Phillips's family. So she was a wealthy woman. Roger Morris was English. He lived here in America. He married her. And actually, she, you know, the way it worked back then, everybody wanted to marry a rich lady because rich ladies couldn't really own property. If their father had money and they married somebody, let's say they had money because their father had money, the minute they married, the money would go to who? Their husband. So all the more reason for all of these men to want to marry a rich lady, because they would get the money from their wife's father's estate. So everybody wanted to marry Phillips. Even George Washington, who knew them, wanted to marry Mary Phillips, but Mary chose Roger Morris. Then Roger Morris built this house for him and his bride, and they were here until 1775. But Roger Morris believed that the British, that is to say the king, should rule over America. But there were some people who did not agree with that, right? And the most famous person who did not want a king ruling over him was who? Became the first president of the United States.
George
Washington, right. And so
George Wash.
The father of our country.
The father of our country.
Yeah.
And George Washington, who had not got a chance to marry Mary Phillips, knew them, but Roger Morris said, I do not want to fight in this war because I still believe in having a king, so I'm going to leave. And he left this house empty. He and Mary Phillips went back up to her father's place up in Phillipsburg, and Roger Morris went back to England, and the house was empty. Well, George Washington knew about this house. He had known them, and so he said, oh, house on a hill. I'm going to have a battle. There's going to be fighting. Why is it a good idea? Why is it a good idea to have a house high on a hill if it's going to be your headquarters for a battle, for a war? Why is it smart to be on a hill? What's good about that? You're on a hill and there's going to be fighting. Why do you want to be on a hill and not on down low? What's better about being on a hill? What can you see from the top of the hill that you couldn't see otherwise? Yeah.
And go straight down and you can see more things.
That's correct. And what are some of the things that you can see? Well, if you're on one side and you have your army on the top of the hill, who can you see coming up to you? It's a battle. You got somebody
The British.
Exactly, the British.
The British soldiers.
Exactly. So you can see the British soldiers coming. So what a good place for George Washington to decide to be in, so that he can fight and he can see what's happening. And that's exactly what he did. He came here and he took over the house, and he had soldiers here. He had his officers inside the house, and he had his soldiers in buildings that were outside the house, but right nearby. And so he encamped here for 6 weeks during what was called the Battle of Harlem Heights. And this was the first battle that George Washington and his army won in New York during the American Revolution. And you know, there are a lot of places where George Washington was, but he was actually here for a long time. For 6 weeks, that's a long time for any general to be in one place, and this is it. So when we go upstairs, we're going to see the room where George Washington, it was his headquarters where he was in charge of his soldiers. We're going to see that.
Okay.
So let me talk just a little bit more about the rooms that we're going to see down here. Remember, Roger Morris built this, and this room, this special kind of room, could have been used during the time that George Washington was here for his men to gather for his officers. But this is a pretty fancy room. Does anybody have any other guesses about what would a room like this be used for? What would people do in a room like this? I'm going to call on you, but let me see if there's somebody else who wants to raise their hand. There's some other take a look. So it's quite fancy. Look at this fancy. This is a chandelier with these candles and these fancy mirrors and this fancy wallpaper. This is set up to look a lot like the way it looked about 150, 200 years ago. So what do you think what would people have done in this room possibly? Yes, the gentleman in the back, yes.
Living room?
Okay, good. So probably some kind of a living room. Very much like that, right? But a kind of a fancy living room, right? Yeah.
Well, I thought in here was parties and swinging dancing.
I agree with you too. Also dancing. This was also used for parties and dancing. An excellent
Dancing and
point.
recreation for visitors.
Exactly. However, this is only reserved for special visitors because some of the visitors that would come here would never even get as far as this room. And so I'm going to take you now into the front of the house. We're going to go into a room which is pretty much empty. I'm going to explain what that was used for, and then we're going to see another room also on the front. So I'm going to get to the front, and I'm going to lead you into that room, and then we're going to stand there and talk about that, okay? So follow me. Yeah, that's the front of the house right where we just were.
Yes.
Right? So, good noticing, because what you see here is, let's let everybody in, if you guys can come in a little more so that everyone can get in. What you can see is that we are in the very first room that you would have gotten into in the house. And the way it would work is, first of all, 254 years ago. Did they have telephones back then? No. Did they have cars back then?
No.
Right. So what was the only way to get up here? Let's say you were coming from Wall Street or way downtown. What would be the only way you could have gotten here? If you couldn't ride in a car? Yes.
CP.
Say it again?
CP.
Actually, I'm talking about like actual transportation.
I
What
would
kind of
say
transportation?
horses.
Exactly. So horses, right? So you could either ride a horse, or you could have a horse and carriage, right? A carriage pulls the horses pull the carriage, or you could have walked. So that was it. So it took, on horseback, it took about 3 hours to come up here from downtown, and that was at a very fast gallop. So if you were coming slower, or if you were in a carriage, it was even slower. It took a while. So you could not call somebody and say, hey, can I come over today? No, and that's not how it worked, because there was no phones. So you would come to the door, say you thought, oh, that's a nice house. I'm selling, I don't know, carpets. Let me come and sell a carpet to the lady who has this house. You would knock on the door, knock, 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 and then the maid would come to the door, and then she'd say, well, and the person would say, I'd like to, I want to show the lady of the house my carpets, or my carpet samples, or whatever it was. And so then, that person would be ushered into this room. This is called the French parlor. It's the front parlor of the house. And remember how somebody, I believe it was you, who said that it was a living room, mini living room, but only for the people who come here, and they're not really well known by the people who own the house, and they have to have a way to talk to you before they decide if you're going to be allowed to go back into that fancy octagon room, right? So this is where you meet people before you decide if they're allowed. Now, a lot of people never saw any more than just this room. And today, there's no furniture in this room, but it's now being fixed up and to look like it did back then. And so I think I have a picture. Let me see if I have a picture of it that I can pass around. Okay, so you can take this and pass it around. It shows you a little bit of what the room looks like. It had chairs, it had a little table, it actually had a little piano so that you could entertain, but again, it's not as fancy as the room in the back. This is called the French parlor. I also want to talk a little bit about the people who, what happened after George Washington was here, okay? So, George Washington took over this house with his troops. They won the Battle of Harlem Heights, right? However, the British were coming up behind them. The British had taken over the rest of New York, and they were coming up behind them. And so, when George Washington won the battle, he moved up back into Westchester County. Somebody mentioned Westchester County. He moved back into Westchester County. And guess what happened? The British took over this house. And they then used it as a command center. But for a group of soldiers called the Hessian soldiers, these were mercenaries. Does anyone know what a mercenary is? A mercenary soldier? We actually have them say, yes, what's the word? Correct. A soldier who works for money. So we had mercenary soldiers here. They were Germans. They were hired by the British, and they were called the Hessian soldiers because they were from an area in Germany ruled over by a family called Hesse. So they were the Hessian soldiers. And when we go into the hallway there, you're going to see a portrait of a famous Hessian general who ruled over the soldiers that were here. The Hessian soldiers were here until the end of the Revolutionary War. However, the Americans, that is us, we won. Ultimately, we won the American Revolution, and we kicked out the British, and the American government took over this house. And then some other interesting things happened. So I'm going to take you into the hallway here. We're going to look at some pictures, and then we're going to see another room on this floor. Yes?
Here there's so many rooms. They say once I went to a wedding, I think 3-4 years ago, it was a whole, the rooms were eating things in the same shape like this.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow. Wow.
I thought,
It is. You know, it might even be from a similar time period in history. All right, we're going to stop here, folks. We're going to talk. Just be careful not to lean on or touch the furniture.
French sofa.
Oh, yeah. Let me talk to you about, I'm glad you mentioned that. I want to talk about the sofa. Okay. Let me talk about this sofa for a second, okay? You notice the shape of it, right? And that was very fashionable at the time. And let me just say what it's like. Let's talk about the way that people dressed back in the old days back then, right? Women wore a very tight thing around basically around their middle that was very tight called a corset, and then they had big skirts. Well, if you have something very tight like that, it kind of keeps you like this. And so this kind of a couch is easier to get up and down from than if you are sinking into a couch. I guarantee that if you're wearing a corset and a big dress like that, and you sink into a couch, you're not getting up without some serious help.
Trouble getting up.
Exactly, but this is firm, so that you can get up and you can put your hand on these, not us, but she could have, the lady of the house, could have put her hand on the bolster, this circular cylinder of a pillow, and raised herself up. So it was very good for that kind of clothing. So, and this is original to the house, this piece. So this is General Wilhelm von Hesse, who was one of the commanders of the Hessians. He actually wasn't here in the house, but he was in charge of all of the Hessian mercenary soldiers in the American Revolution. Yes?
What's his name?
Wilhelm, like William, so in German, Wilhelm.
Wilhelm.
Hesse, so Hesse from Hessian. Wilhelm is the German version of William. Wilhelm, so that's him. And you notice he looks a bit like George Washington because it's a similar style. This was the fashion, the way they had these kinds of coats and they had these kinds of hats. That was the fashion at the time. But that is not Washington, that is Wilhelm von Hesse. I'm going to ask you to turn now and look at the portrait in back, but carefully, again, just not brushing it. Okay, so now I'm going to tell you a little bit about what happened next in this house. The next thing that happened was that George Washington won the American Revolution, as we know, and when he became president, when George Washington became president, he decided to bring all of his men and their wives back here. The very first, when he was the first president of the United States, the first cabinet of the United States, with John Adams, Thomas Jefferson, Alexander Hamilton, Henry Knox, and their wives, they all came back here for a very fancy dinner party. That was in 1790. So that was when we had won the American Revolution and they came back for this dinner party. Now we do not know if it was in the Octagon Room or outside. It could have been outside like a very, very fancy picnic, but with tables and chairs, not sitting on the grass, like a fancy, fancy picnic, or it could have been inside. So Washington came back here for that fancy dinner, but then he left this house and it was the property of the United States. And they, basically what happened, and this happens a lot after wars, the winning side sells off the property of the losing side. Okay? And that's what happened in this case. Eventually the house was bought by this woman and her husband. This woman's name is Eliza Jumel. Her husband, Stephen, was a wealthy, a rich wine merchant. He was a person who sold wines, and he was French. And this is a portrait of her with her two grandchildren. And as you can see, it's a little bit, you can see a little, it's quite dark, but you can see how she's wearing that kind of a dress that I was talking about with a tight, what they call bodice, which is this sort of middle part, and then this very large skirt. It's certainly not something that's easy to get up and down in, and she's sitting on this fancy chair, and there she is with her grandchildren. Eliza Jumel had very fancy taste in furniture and furnishings. So if you look around, you can see that the wallpaper here is designed to look like marble, like stone. Eliza Jumel, she wanted her lobby, if you will, her front hall, to look like an ancient Roman temple, something really fancy. And if you look toward the Octagon Room, you can see there are clouds on the wallpaper. She wanted her guests to feel that they were looking from a temple into heaven. That's how she wanted them to feel when they came into this house. And these golden wings that are up near the ceiling, you see the golden wings, and they have a quiver full of arrows, you see that? Those were given to Madame Eliza Jumel and her husband Stephen, we think possibly by Napoleon, who was the ruler of France at the time during part of the time that Eliza Jumel was here. And she traveled a lot back and forth to France, and we know that these are French. We know that that's really gold paint, but made out of gold. Not just gold colored, but made out of gold. And it's painted on wood, and it is possible that it was actually from Napoleon to her. She was a big fan of Napoleon. We are going to also, before we go upstairs, we're going to take a look at the dining room. The dining room, I also want you to take a look around and notice some things. I want you to look at the lamps. See if you can notice anything about the light, how the lamps are in that room or the lights. And I also want you to look at the wallpaper and see what you think, and then we'll talk about it once you see. So why don't we just kind of, let's let people take a look in. You know, you can't go all the way in, but you can look and we'll circle around, and maybe you can lead them, the chaperones can lead people around so that everybody gets a chance to really take a look. So maybe 4 or 5 people at a time, and then we can take a look. And I want you to notice things, and then we're going to ask you what you thought, what you saw.
And I also forgot to tell you about this couch. Is this the yellow stripey has made with silk fabric?
It is. It's a silk, yeah, it's a yellow striped silk, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, isn't that beautiful?
It looks beautiful. Now this one is the dining room, is in 1825. Right here you can see there's a fireplace zone.
Nice.
Right next to it there's a clock, and there's
I see the chandelier and the fireplace.
the crystal on it on the ceiling
Yeah, that's the chandelier.
that has diamonds. You know, like it's just changed around.
Some 4 windows,
4 windows.
rectangular size.
Oh no, I see there's 4 teapots. There's a vase, and then there's a couple with curtains. You can equally use it
So say it again.
where you can, just in case, and you can, and that's the dining room, 1825.
I'm gonna, because you ask a lot of questions, I promise I will get to you, but let's see if there's other hands. Anybody else notice anything there about, what about,
I noticed there's 4 windows
yes,
in the wall,
yes.
shaped like ice cream cones.
Yes, isn't that odd? It's very strange. See,
Fireplace.
yes, excellent. Okay, so, good. Great noticing. Let me,
Table with 6 chairs.
yes.
Extra chairs in the back of the window. And the cabinet to keep all your personal belongings and your papers. And the clock.
Right. Okay, so let me talk about a few things he mentioned, okay? First of all, this very strange wallpaper that looks like ice cream cones, right? It really looks quite modern. It doesn't really look like something from way back, but it is exactly the wallpaper that Morris-Jumel ordered. We know the wallpaper that Morris-Jumel ordered because she wrote letters to her husband in France. She was in America, and she was writing to him in France saying, get me this wallpaper. And she described exactly what she wanted, so this is exactly the wallpaper style that she wanted. So we know this is really like what she would have had here. So that's an interesting thing, that sometimes something looks modern, but they really did have that fashion back then. I want to talk about the windows, because I didn't talk about it enough when I was in the Octagon room too. Remember, okay, we said that there were no cars and there were no phones, okay? But let's also think back a little bit on what else they did not have back then. Back then, right, they didn't have cars, they didn't have phones. How about heating and cooling? What do we have today that they didn't have then? What do they have?
Air conditioning and some heating.
Exactly.
Heating surfaces.
So, exactly. So what's the only way to heat a room if you don't have heating?
Use coal.
Okay, but you have to have a stove for coal.
Use stove.
What did these rooms have that you could heat a room with? What do they have?
A fireplace.
Fireplace. Fireplace. Oh, and let's break up the chair and throw it in the fireplace. I could do that.
Find wood, cut it, and put it in the fire.
Exactly. So fireplace. So guess what? They had no electricity.
No electricity.
No electricity at all. So they couldn't have air conditioning, they couldn't have heating the way we think of heating, but they could heat using fireplaces, and they needed windows. And they needed doors for air to come through. When they first built this house, it was a summer home. And so they needed air to flow through. And if you notice, I'm just going to stay where you are, but I'm going to show you this. This is one door. This is the side door out. This is a side door to the outside. And so you could have opened these doors and had air coming this way and that way. If you'd open that door or the windows, you would have air flowing throughout this, and it would be cooling down this otherwise very hot house. So they report when they built, say
You
again?
can't breathe without air, you need air to breathe.
You sure do, and it could have gotten very hot in here, but they were able to open all of these windows. And also, if you have no electricity, how do you light your house? If you can't light it with a light bulb because you don't have electricity, what do you use to make light inside of the house? Yes?
Laws and candles.
Exactly. Exactly right. So you have candles, and I don't know if you noticed how there are all these mirrors in the octagon room. The mirrors reflect light, so it made the room lighter because you couldn't turn up. However, by the time the Jumels were here, they had something a little bit more than candles. The lamps on either side of that fireplace there, they look like this, like a vase. You see those? Did you guys see those?
Yes.
Those
Yeah, we see the
lamps?
vase.
They have a wick and oil, and you could actually light the wick and then raise and lower it, so it was like having a dimmer switch. But it was like a candle, but you could actually make it dimmer or brighter. That was a big change. When the house was built, they didn't have that technology yet. They didn't know how to do that yet. They only had candles.
And they didn't
Yes.
have electricity, electric lights and so forth.
Exactly.
They use candles so they
It
can
was
see.
fairly hard.
How
Yes.
about if we
Yes.
could use the lantern?
Yes.
Or lantern.
Lanterns were used mostly outside, usually, and the way it was is that, for instance, let's say you were reading in your room. We think you can stay up till 11, 12 o'clock, 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock in the morning because you can turn on your light or turn off your light. Well, they couldn't do that. All you had was a candle. Before they had this raising and lowering of the wicks even. So people really would read until the light went away. And depending on how rich or poor you are, you might have a candle or many candles, or you might not have that many candles. So, when it gets dark, that's the end of your reading time. So it was a very different life than it is today. So we're gonna go up to the second floor, and we're gonna see a bunch more rooms, and we're gonna talk a little bit more about what happened after Eliza and her husband Stephen bought and started to decorate the house. It's a big, big house. Nice place to live, huh?
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? I like this house. Yeah, it's beautiful. And there's no furniture right now in this room, but there will be soon. They've taken it out to fix it up, but it's going to be really beautiful when it comes back. They just put up this new wallpaper, which is beautiful. Let's see if everybody's following. This way, please, everyone. Come into this room. This way? In here. Little gallery in there. I'll talk about that in a second. Yeah. So come in and let everybody come in. Okay. So this was Eliza Jumel's bedroom. And back then, a lot of men and women had separate bedrooms. You see in some of the places, there were doorways between bedrooms belonging to a husband and wife. This one, in this case, Eliza was here, and this was her own room. Also, you might have a room, you might share some time with your husband or wife, and then you would still have your own room for your own things, to dress, to get ready, things like that. So if you would come back here, let's just say in about a year, you'll see her bed will be back. It's a very elegant bed, and there'll be carpet on the floor, and there'll be furniture here that is being taken out and being fixed up to make sure that we have it looking exactly like Eliza Jumel would have had it. But the furniture itself that will be back in this room actually did belong to Eliza Jumel. I want to talk for a minute about Eliza because I think she's probably the most interesting person who ever lived in this house, even though George Washington is so wonderful and all the other people, but I have to talk about Eliza a little bit. So let me tell you about her. She started her life very, very poor. She lived in Providence, Rhode Island, which is maybe about, I don't know, 4 or 5 hours from here. Today, by car, but back then it was probably days away. And she grew up, her mother was a prostitute, and she didn't know who her father was. She grew up in a very poor household, and her family was basically chased out of town by the townspeople because they didn't like what her mother was doing. And they didn't like her, and so she spent a lot of her time in a place called, what they call it, like a debtor's prison or a poorhouse, where people were sent who didn't have any money and weren't able to take care of themselves because of their poverty. It was a bad system, and we're talking about in the late 1700s, early 1800s. This poor girl was so smart that by the time she came to New York, she got a job as a very minor actress on the stage, like an extra, like a small part. She could speak and write and read in English and French. She became completely literate in French and English. She was seen on the stage by this rich wine merchant, and I'm going to tell you a story, which we do not know if it's 100% true, but it might be true. But I love the story, so I'm going to tell it to you. Eliza had a relationship, this we know for a fact, she had this 4-year affair or relationship with this man, Morris-Jumel. But, she was his lover, his girlfriend, but she wasn't married to him. Well, the story goes like this. One day she says, "Oh, I'm not feeling well, I'm sick." And she looks pale, and she seems like she's sicker and sicker and sicker. She takes to her bed, she lies down, she says she's not feeling well, and she's in her bed for weeks, and she's saying how terrible she feels, and she's telling the doctor that she's going to die, and they don't know what's wrong with her, and there's nothing they can do, and and she's basically wasting away in her bed, and she says, and then, and when everybody's sure she's going to die, she says to Stephen, "I'm about to die. Would you make an honest woman of me?" And what that meant was, will you marry me so that I can die a married woman and not a woman who's having an affair, but a woman who has a relationship that is legal? Will you marry me before I die? And so he says, of course, Eliza, I'll marry you. So he marries her. And the next morning she wakes up. She's totally fine. She gets out of bed. Now she's Mrs. Eliza Jumel. So the story is, that's how she got her husband, or her boyfriend at the time, to marry her. Right. Pretty smart, huh? Pretty smart. Yes. So that would have been probably in about sometime around 1800, 1805, something like that. Yeah. Yes.
I call that right and smart.
Right and smart, I agree, very right and smart, brilliant. So that's Eliza Jumel. Say it again?
The honest love story.
Really honest love story, but really very, very smart Eliza. Okay, so Eliza Jumel, not only did she marry Stephen, but she was very happily married to him for a long time, married for 18 years. And what happened was, Stephen was a wine merchant and a seller of things and spent a lot of time in France. He spent time in France. She came back to New York. And what happened was, the interesting next part is that he didn't do as well in business as he was, we would have thought he would have done. He wasn't doing so well. Eliza came back here to New York, and she got a very special relationship set up legally. She got set up so that she could be the boss of the company here in New York. Now this was very unusual because women didn't have the right to do business under their own name, but she set up a legal arrangement with her husband because he was in France, and she got the right to do business under the name of Jumel. So that was very smart. So what did she do? She started to buy and sell New York real estate, and she made a fortune and became the richest woman in New York. And her husband, who hadn't done very well in his business in France, when he came back, he had to depend on his wife, Eliza, to give him money because she had made so much money and he didn't have any money anymore. She became so smart because she was such a good businesswoman. So that's another reason to admire how smart Eliza Jumel was. And she did one other very important thing. She set up what's called a life trust so that she would get a salary from the estate for the rest of her life, like a chunk of money every year for the rest of her life. And she set that up so it couldn't be changed. And she also took some of the family property and put it in the name of her daughter, so that if there were creditors or people who wanted money, they couldn't take it because it was in her daughter's name. Super, super smart lady.
She's a very smart, honest lady.
Well, yes, she was
And
smart.
some story, real estate.
Really a remarkable person. I'm going to get you a promise. So, we're going to see the bedroom of Eliza's second husband. Eventually, Stephen Jumel died, and Eliza Jumel married a very famous person whose name was Aaron Burr. Now, I don't know if any of you know who Aaron Burr was.
Aaron Burr.
If-
I think there's
Okay,
Hamilton.
Very good. Vice President and?
He's the enemy of Alexander Hamilton.
That's correct. He killed Alexander Hamilton in a duel.
Yeah.
Yes,
And he shot him.
that's correct.
What did they do that for?
Okay, so that's a very good question. Let me answer that. First of all, does everyone know what a duel is?
Two guys.
Two guys?
Yeah, two guys with guns and then they're pointing
At each other.
each other.
And see who would be the winner.
Perfect. That's perfect, correct.
How tall was that Alexander Hamilton?
How tall was he?
Was he?
I don't know the answer to that. Go ahead.
5'7".
They
were both 5'7".
Both 5'7". Thank you. Second.
Okay.
97 tall.
Okay, yes. Question.
Question. So, how come how come I've been saying things instead of standing over here?
Oh, because he had a lot of business to conduct, because he was doing his business, but his business didn't turn out so good. And she was tired of being in France. She wanted to go back to New York. She loved New York. So that's why she came and he stayed there. Let me talk a little bit about the duel in Alexander Hamilton, okay? Because you guys are asking that question. So why did they fight? Well, they actually fought together in the American Revolution. They knew each other. They had even been lawyers together defending the same client. They actually had worked together. So why did they fight? Well, Alexander Hamilton and Aaron Burr disagreed in some politics. So it's not that different from the way things are today. They disagreed in politics, and Alexander Hamilton said some things about Aaron Burr that got into the press, and they were insulting each other back and forth in the press. It got very nasty, and that's when they were challenging each other to a duel. Let me just say one more thing. There are many opportunities in the duel to stop it. In other words, the way the whole duel thing used to work, there were many times when you could negotiate and stop the fighting. Well, they kept on going and kept on going, and even though everybody knew it was stupid, and Alexander Hamilton's son had died in the duel, one of his sons, he had many sons, but one of his sons died in the duel, they still insisted, and Alexander Hamilton did not actually point his gun and shoot at Aaron Burr. He shot into the air, which was a common thing to do, but right before he did that, he made some motions like testing out his gun and checking it out and like aiming it. So he gave Aaron Burr every reason to think he was really going to fire, but then he didn't fire, but then Aaron Burr fired and Aaron Burr hit him. By the way, those guns were not very good guns. They didn't really work very well. So it's possible to fire and not hit anyone, because those were really, really old-fashioned guns, like not at all like today. And so he actually did hit Alexander Hamilton in the body, and then Alexander Hamilton was taken by the doctor, but he died the next night. But that happened when they were young men. Aaron Burr lived to be an old man. He married Eliza Jamel when he was already in his 80s, and she was in her 50s. So he married a younger woman, and he married her probably because by that time she was a very rich woman, and she married him because she thought, he was the vice president of the United States. He had a good family, came from a good family. It will make me be more accepted by all the rich people in New York. The rich people in New York did not really accept Eliza Jamel ever. They sort of thought she's not one of us, even though she had all this money. Money wasn't enough. They did not really ever accept her, and she always wanted to be accepted by them. And she thought by marrying Aaron Burr, that maybe that would work, but it didn't work. Anyway, Aaron Burr decided he would hit the jackpot. He was going to spend all her money. He was going to do all this business and all this, and he started to spend her money as fast as he could. Now, the thing is, remember, Eliza had set it up so that he couldn't just spend money. He had to ask her for money, and he did, and she gave it to him. But eventually, she saw that he was really not taking care of money, and she did not like it. So she divorced him. She divorced him. They were married for less than 2 years. She divorced him, and this is an amazing thing, another really amazing thing about Eliza Jamel. She hired for her divorce lawyer another son of Alexander Hamilton. So what about also a little mean, because of course Alexander Hamilton's death had also damaged Aaron Burr's reputation. Aaron Burr never was respected and liked after that very much. And so she knew that that was the last person he would want to see was anybody having to do with Alexander Hamilton. But she hired Alexander Hamilton's son for her divorce lawyer, and the divorce was granted, and so she was free of Aaron Burr. And actually he died on the same day that the divorce was granted. He was an old man. He was living in Staten Island at the time, and he died on that same day that she got her divorce. Yeah.
Why did they get divorced for? Or they...
Well, you have to have a reason, right? In divorce, you have to have a reason, and she said he was unfaithful to her.
Yeah.
Now, whether he was or not, we don't really know. It's possible, because, he was quite a ladies' man, but that's what she said. Yeah. And why did she really divorce him? Probably because he was trying to spend all her money, and she was not having it.
He wasn't taking care of business, she just married her for her money, not for love.
Exactly, and she found that
That's
out.
the whole story, James.
I think that's
You marry a woman, you got married not for her money, but show wealth and responsibility. That's what a marriage is for, an equal partnership.
I agree, and that was not an equal partnership for sure. It was meant to be, but it didn't turn out that way. So the next room we're going to see is Aaron Burr's bedroom, where he stayed and lived when he was married to Eliza Jamel. So I'm going to skirt around here. I'm going to take you into that room. We're not going to go inside, but you're going to rotate in and take a look, okay?
This is the Aaron Burr's bed chamber. This is Aaron's bed. That's a stripy chair that he puts all the way to the pillows, like this drawers. The second one, but it was right here on this curtains, cover it, and then the hiding place for this bedrooms.
Very interested in the things that are here on the wall, and this is the baseball exhibit. I do not want to deprive you of the baseball exhibit. I'm going to talk to you about the Aaron Burr bedroom, then we're going to talk a little bit about the baseball exhibit, and then we're going to go back to looking at the house. Because this is such an interesting exhibit, and I know a lot of you would like it, I want to not skip it, but we can't spend a lot of time here. You can come back and look at it anytime on your own if you want to. But I'm going to ask everybody to come back to this hall, and then we're going to talk about the Aaronburg bedroom, and then I'm going to introduce you to someone who's going to talk a little bit about the baseball exhibit, and then we're going to continue our tour of the house. Okay.
Can I start?
Yes.
It's really interesting about Amber. I can see the 4 curtains in the bedrooms.
Yes. Right. So, it's quite elegant. There's that 4-poster bed. There's the curtains. There's the dresser. And also there's that striped chair. Why is that striped chair important? Well, it's really important just because, has anybody heard of the musical Hamilton? Yes. Yes. So Hamilton, the musical, part of it was written here in that room. Lin-Manuel Miranda is a local person from Washington Heights, and he knew about this house, and the woman who was the director of this house at the time, she invited him, when she heard from him that he was writing a musical about Alexander Hamilton, she said, why don't you come here and write in the Aaronburg bedroom? And he did. And if you watch, there's a PBS documentary about the making of Hamilton. You will see Lin-Manuel sitting in that chair with his laptop writing, and he wrote the songs about Aaronburg, he wrote in that bedroom.
Also, they won for the Tony Awards.
They won a ton of Tony Awards. Yes, they did.
Not Tony Award, that's world of musical history.
It's a fantastic musical, by the way. If you ever get a chance to see it, it's the most remarkable thing. Now, we are going to interrupt our historical tour of the mansion to talk a little bit about baseball history and why this, and maybe you could tell them a little bit, and I'm going to stop you if you start going on and on, because I know you want to talk a lot about it, but I want you to tell them a little bit about why it's important to have a history of baseball exhibit exactly here at this mansion, why it's here, and maybe just talk a little bit about, that whole aspect of this show, okay? So this is Neil.
Hey, Neil.
Hi, how's everybody doing? I'm an attorney, art dealer, and sports enthusiast, and the museum asked me to curate this show about the Polo Grounds. And you're right, the Polo Grounds is important for this particular museum in a sense because right across the street basically was the Polo Grounds. And the Polo Grounds not only housed the New York Giants, which most people think of, it housed 5 teams. The New York Yankees played here from 1913 to 1922.
Wow, I didn't know
So
that.
you didn't know that. Babe Ruth actually played his first game as a Yankee in the Polo Grounds. And Babe Ruth hit his first home run at the Polo Grounds as a Boston Red Sox.
The documentary special about baseball.
Right. So
Ken Burns.
that's right. And we hope Mr. Burns comes here actually. But anyway, so we also, the New York Giant football team played here from 1925 to 1955. They actually won 3 NFL championships. And also the New York Jets, who were originally called the New York Titans, played here from 60 to 64. And the New York Mets played here from 62 to 63. So although Ebbets Fields gets a lot of credit for Brooklyn, and it should, the Boys of Summer, the Polo Grounds, in my judgment, is actually even more important because almost every New York team that we all love started or played there at one time or another. So all these tributes are pieces that I do, and what makes them a little bit extraordinary is generally when you think of memorabilia, you think of a single autograph or a single ticket, which is great. I try to join multiple items together in a sense making a story. I'll just show you one piece now, and then when you guys come back later, I'll be able to give you a full tour. I'm going to start off with my father's hero, Mickey Mantle. And one of his great accomplishments was 18 home runs in World Series play, which is still a record. We have the ticket from every World Series game Mantle hit a home run in, and underneath it is the autograph of the pitchers he hit the home runs off of. So, again, we try to tell the stories of that moment. So, enjoy the rest of your tour and come back. I'll be here until 5 o'clock, or at least 4:30. And the most important news today is that Wisconsin's beating Michigan 35 to 8.
Thank you, Neil. Thank you so much. I know it's really, honestly, it's fantastic. Okay, so we're going to see George Washington's War Room. I also want to point out this room. So this room was one of the bedrooms of one of the children. When the Morrises were here, it was the Morris children, but this is set up to be what the room would have been like for MJM's grandson, William Chase. So take a look, come on in, take a look and see it's a boys' room. And I also want you to notice the kinds of things that are in that room that would indicate that it was a kind of a school room. In other words, a place where somebody would study and would learn and would have their lessons. So when you are coming out of this room after you see it, I want to hear from you what you think would have been used as a schoolroom or as a teaching tool, something they would have had to learn from when William Chase was there.
That room I saw should be a library.
Wait until everyone comes out and then
All right. This is nice.
And also Williams that I see the desktop.
Okay, wait until everyone comes out because I want to get from everyone, and then we'll see. As something that, like a boy would have been studying. Notebooks, excellent. Notebooks, very, very good. Notebooks for sure. What else? What else would,
The map of the world.
very good. Now, a map, but it is a special kind of map. What's that called? Yes.
Not good. I think it's all over the globe.
The globe, excellent. So map, globe, yes. You would have studied geography using the globe.
Nice about the history of the United States.
Sure, absolutely, about the history of the United States, yes. So remember, back in those days, mostly, the fashion was for only boys to get educated. But even Eliza Jamel, I think she would have educated her girl, her granddaughter, at least a little bit until she got married. But it was popular really for the boys to get an education. Girls had a different kind of education of learning how to keep a home, and mostly boys were the ones who were going to school. Yeah, no flash, just flash, no flash. All the pictures are fine, but not flash.
We're gonna walk slowly. So next we're gonna do for the George Washington after William Bard or Williamburg for boys' school room. And to see when we get to the line, and then we're gonna see for the George Washington. This is the Washington's War Room, and we can tell you about George Washington just lives into this. He was on August 27, 1776. Now you can mace by that's his text, with his desktop, with what they're going to. There's the drawers, or my copy might on those next windows. There's the fireplaces, and I tell you before. And there's the statues. It's kind of glass. Washington D.C. Probably like in bowls in here, or kind of draws everything together for it. That's a Washington's wall. We're heading downstairs.
Yes, have a seat wherever you feel comfortable.
Take anybody sit down, Carl.
Yep. Okay, good. Yep, have a seat. Great. Okay. So I guess we got a couple more coming down, right?
Oh, I just had to wait.
Okay. So this is called the colonial kitchen. And I want to ask you guys what you think. Why is this called a kitchen? Why is it a kitchen? I don't see any.
That has to cook every day and night for breakfast, lunch, and dinner.
And what do they use to cook? Where's the cooking happening?
I see was pots.
Good, frying pans. Okay, you see the frying pans. Where do they?
Frying pans.
Where does that happen? Okay. You got
I saw the kettle.
Okay, right. Okay, so I'm going to show you something.
That's the tea kettle on the left.
Right, now why is this on this kind of metal arm here? What's going on here? How do you boil the water? How do you cook the food, what do you cook it over?
Yeah, I use the fire for the fireplace.
Exactly. Heat it. Use the fire in the fireplace. So, this is the stove. Back in the colonial days in 1765, when this house was built, this is how they cooked. They didn't have a stove, they had a fireplace.
They would have regular ovens.
That's
Before
right,
anything was
well-
invented.
Now, but that's a very interesting point, because they didn't have an oven the way we think of. But actually, there is a kind of an oven here. You see this?
Oh, that's,
And there's a hole in there, and there's a cover here. What kind, it is a kind of an oven. Well, there is something we cook today in ovens like that lots of people go out and eat that kind of food that goes into an oven like that. Any ideas for what we cook today in an oven like that?
it has a cord.
Microwave oven.
Okay, but this is like, just like this. You put something, you put it on a flat thing, and you put it in there and cook it, and then you take it out, cut it up into slices. Anybody? Exactly. It is like a pizza oven. Now, back in those days, 1765, they didn't have pizza because they didn't know about pizza. They didn't have Italian immigrants coming, so they didn't know about pizza, but they would cook bread and cakes.
Bread, rolls, cakes.
Well, they would cook those in this oven. They would put hot
Bread.
coals in there.
And bread.
Bread. They would put hot coals in there and put their bread in and cook it in that oven. So they had a kind of oven. And then they would cook the rest of the food on the fire. And as you can see, these pots and pans, well, they have these legs. And so that's a way to put hot coals underneath and cook your food above. So that's what it's done. Yeah, so they would stand. Exactly. Good. And somebody mentioned something earlier. They talked a little bit about for light. What about a lantern? Well, this is a lantern, but this wouldn't have been used down here as much as it would have been used outside. You put your candle in here. It has little holes cut in it, and then you can have the light shining out of it, and you can carry it. Usually, it had a strap that you could carry, and you would use it maybe to check on your cows to make sure that they were milked, or go out there in the early morning when it was still dark. You would use a candle like that. Also, here we have a replica of something. So poorer children would make dolls out of. Does anybody want to guess what this is made out of? What is this?
That has unbleached.
Oh, man, twigs,
Twigs. Here, touch that.
paper.
See if you can figure out what this is. What is this?
I don't know.
It's dried and it comes from a plant.
All those leaves?
Dried leaves, dried paper.
Okay, but a
Leaves.
specific kind of plant that is actually used for food. Any guesses? We've got a couple of other things that are really important about what was interesting about this kitchen. So first of all, the people who lived upstairs, probably most of them never ever came down here. Who worked down here? Who would have worked down here? Well, the servants would have worked here. And in 1765, New York still had slavery, and there were slaves that were working in this house who were working for the Morrises, for Roger and Mary Morris.
Servants.
And then after they left, the Jumels were here, but the Jumels did not have slaves. They did have servants. And there was a kind of servant called an indentured servant. And that's important to know what that is, okay? A lot of people came here, very, very poor, and even sometimes children would be sold into this kind of a slavery called indenture. And what it meant is that they would be sold for like a term of years, like 20 years. They would have to work for 20 years for this family, and they would get fed, and they would get a place to sleep, and they would learn a trade, like maybe they would learn how to cook, or they would learn how to take care of gardens, or whatever it was. And then after those 20 years or 12 years, whatever it was, then they would be freed, and they would have learned something, and maybe they could go and work for a regular salary. But many people were indentured servants. So many ancestors were indentured servants. And like I said, there was slavery, and then slavery, it took a while before slavery ended in New York State. But the Jumels were anti-slavery, did not believe in slavery. And so they did not have slaves, but the Morrises did have slaves. We know they had at least 3 slaves. But living down here, there was a much bigger area because the wall that you're in front of wasn't here. This whole area, you know how big it is upstairs? Well, it's equally big down here. It's actually, if you broke down all the walls that are up here now, it would be as big as it is upstairs. And there was an area for sleeping, and there was an area for washing, and this would have been the area for cooking. And another thing that's important to know is that here there are some floorboards. It's not like anywhere else. It's covered with wood, and the reason is that down below here, there is a well. And so this is a very unusual house because you could actually bring water directly up from the well using the bucket and having it go down into the well and pulling it up from here so that you wouldn't have to go, because otherwise servants would have to go on where to get water. Where would they have got to go to get water? We know we're surrounded by what?
The fountain.
Well, there weren't any though.
Well, they can't find a river to get water.
Exactly, you have to go all the way down to either the Harlem River or the Hudson River. And that's a long way to carry water. If you've ever tried to carry some bottles of water.
Almost like really heavy one.
So the fact that they could pull water right into the house was a luxury. And even for servants, it made life better than having to carry water all of that way. So even though life was very hard for servants and slaves, they did have some things that made it a little bit less hard. And by the way, this floor, you see how it's brick? It would have been dirt. So it was not brick at the time, it was dirt. But this stone is original. This was stone, like a stone fireplace here, and then and the stone on the floor here, and then this would have been a dirt floor. There's a couple of other things down here that are just important to kind of know about. And that is, I want to show you something. Well, let me show you a couple of things, and you're going to tell me what you think they were used for. Okay, this is the most fun one. Let's see if you can guess. Now, I do this with a lot of school groups that I have, and sometimes they guess and sometimes they don't. Now, I'm going to tell you first, I'm going to give you some hints. I'm going to tell you, this is something that goes over the fire, okay? Now, it has this. So something gets put in here to cook. Anybody have a guess about what this is used, what gets put in here?
The toaster.
Exactly, it is a toaster. It is a 19th century toaster. Right. That's some toasters.
You can see it spins around.
It spins around. You could get both sides toasted. Very good. Okay, excellent. So I will show you another thing, and you can tell me, and I think you're going to be able to guess this one because you probably had this for breakfast. Maybe some of you have. I certainly have a few times. So what do you think this is?
A waffle.
To make paint waffle.
Perfect. A waffle iron.
A waffle iron.
And so you hold it over.
Iron.
You hold it over the fire and
Like-
you make your waffles. Okay, so
We like waffles for breakfast.
oh, is that right? My goodness, well, how perfect. Okay, so you can see that some of the things that we have today, they had then. Okay, so but there's a special thing I really want to show you that is down here. Now, I will tell you, this is not something that has to do with cooking. I'm going to let every single one of the people who are sitting here hold this. And then I'm going to ask you what you think it is. Yes. So we're going to pass it around very carefully. I'm going to help you. And so about 19 of these were found all around the grounds here. So I'm going to start with you, and you're going to hold your hands together like that, and I'm going to hold your hands together like that, and I'm going to put, okay, you're sleeping, cannonball. But it is a special kind of cannonball called a shot. And it comes from a very smaller cannon than usual, but it's a pretty deadly weapon. If you think about this, with the gunpowder and then it goes shooting, it can break down a wall, it can obviously damage a person, if not kill them. It is a very heavy object to be flying through the air and hitting something. So this is a Revolutionary War shot cannonball from from 1776, and they were all found around here, so they're all from the Revolutionary War, and this is an actual one. Absolutely, they were a dangerous one. Sure.
What about these plates?
So these plates just represent plates that they would have had. So this is a metal called pewter. So a lot of the plates are made out of metal rather than china. Probably upstairs they would have had some fancy china for the ladies and gentlemen upstairs.
It came with a stainless steel.
There was no stainless steel back then. Before stainless steel.
Not didn't invent it yet, Carl.
That's correct. So, but this this would have been before the stainless steel, and it was
Metal.
used for a lot of things. It's called pewter, and it's quite light, actually. Oh, we did pass that around. You can see it's quite light. It's the opposite of what we were just touching. It's very light, but it's not ceramic. It's metal, and that was used for many common things like for mugs and various things like that.
Use that for coffee cups.
It's much lighter.
Yes, light,
Yeah, much lighter.
not heavy.
Not heavy at all. Yeah, so that's
So
pewter.
you hold your hands.
Well, yeah, but I think upstairs they would have had, yeah, so this is this common metal. So you would have had it for, like if you were, having more casual food, maybe not in a very fancy dinner party, you would have just had this for everyday use. But I'm sure they use china upstairs. Okay, so that really concludes pretty much everything. Let me show you just two more things.
Two more things.
Okay. First of all, this is, okay. Anybody want to guess what this was used for? Now remember, upstairs, we talked a little, well, okay, I won't give it a hint yet. I'm going to just ask. What do you think this was used for?
It's like a,
It's to make something. Okay, doesn't
Candles? Make candles?
Okay.
Or
Yeah.
utensils.
Yeah?
It could be candles.
It is candles. It is to use to make candles. Remember, they needed a lot of candles. So they would pour the wax in, put the wick in, and pour the wax in, and then be able to pull out the candles.
it fills in, it's like a pan pipe.
That's true, but it is in fact candle. And of course, and what's this?
Iron.
Right, so you heat it up in the stove and you iron, right? No electricity, but you can iron your clothes.
Yeah.
Yep.
You don't have to worry.
Making
about
sure
child
the clothes
leaving
will be
the
dry.
iron on.
Say it again?
You don't have to worry about your child leaving the iron on.
Exactly, that's right. Maybe things were better back then in some ways. But in other ways, it was much harder because you had to scrub your clothes by hand. You had to cook over a fire. You couldn't regulate the fire the way you can today. There were, cooking, cleaning, and all that took a lot longer back then than it does today.
Like this
So,
iron where we do for the laundry.
Yes, it was a much more labor-intensive process than it is today. So that's really pretty much it. And if you have any more questions, I think we should go upstairs where your colleague is who couldn't come downstairs, and let's conclude the tour upstairs. Okay, and I'm gonna, Come on, everybody, let's just come in a little bit more so we're in the circle here. So, we'll wait until everybody's back. I'm sorry? There's a men's room downstairs and a women's room here. That's fine. Men's room is downstairs, the women's room is upstairs. We have everybody back who's, do we have any other people besides the two that went? Am I still waiting for some people?
It's at least 3 people.
I think there's a couple people who are still coming up from downstairs. Let's wait. Okay. How many more?
Just one in the bathroom.
Okay, fine. So, anyway, I just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing me to give you this tour. I'm happy to answer any more questions that you have. I hope that this also makes you think a lot more about American history and how it's really real and really here, right under our feet every day. There's so much history, what happened actually right here in New York City and right here. Yeah.
Well, I saw the house is nice. Actual thing you should do, put it in the history,
Put it in the history.
History books.
Oh, in the history. Uh-huh.
history stations and the TV.
Thank you. You know, I don't know, but there might have been something done on there, I'm not sure. They sometimes do ghost hunts here. There is this idea that maybe Morris-Jumel is still around here as a ghost. I don't know, I can't confirm I neither confirm nor deny that. It may or may not be true. They actually have these ghost hunts here and they're really fun, so if you have a chance, you can come back for one of those. Yes, there's a lot of amazing history in Manhattan's oldest house.
Right.
So I also want to just urge you to, if you can't get a chance to spend more time in the house today, that you can come back and learn more. There's just so much about New York City history and about the Revolutionary War right here in Washington Heights. So thank you so much for coming.
Likewise, Catherine.
Thank you.